In 2018, 18-year-old Cameron Herron was street racing against his friend before crashing his Mustang into a mother and toddler, killing them both. Here's his reaction to his sentencing of 24 years when he only expected a maximum of 10.
The court's going to adjudicate the defendant guilty, sentence him to 9 years in the Florida State Prison. On count 2, same charge, the court will adjudicate the defendant guilty, sentence him to 15 years Florida State Prison, and that'll run consecutive to count 1, for a total of 24 years Florida State Prison.
Nevada's Clown Motel shares its land with an abandoned cemetery, where most of the 300 people buried there either died in a mine fire or from a 1902 plague. Between all the money and fame, Taylor Swift has faced some significant challenges with obsessive fans. She's received thousands of letters containing death threats and has had her properties broken into dozens of times. The threats have become so persistent that her security team has to install facial recognition software at every venue she performs at in order to specifically distinguish between her known stalkers and her fans. Before he was caught, 6'9" serial killer Edmund Kemper became friends with the very police officers investigating his murders. Calling him Big Ed, they would often socialize with him at the local bar and never would have suspected him. When he initially confessed, they thought he was pulling a prank. In 2013, 2 armed men wearing masks broke into Texas man Rogelio Andaverde's home and abducted him right in front of his petrified wife. She was convinced he was murdered until he returned home a few days later completely unharmed. Turns out he staged the abduction himself so that he could go out drinking with some friends. During a photo shoot, a model in New York City was distracted by the first plane hitting the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. Daniel Villegas was 16 years old when he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 2 teenagers in 1995. However, he later claimed that he had nothing to do with the killings and was coerced into confessing by detectives. Here's a video of him finally being found innocent after serving 20 years in prison.
The state of Texas versus Daniel Villegas. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of...
Scientists have found an 18,000-year-old mummified puppy in Siberian permafrost with its teeth, nose, and whiskers still intact. DNA testing has not been able to determine whether Dogor is a wolf or dog, since it's possible that he represents a common ancestor to both. Last summer, a massive drought in Texas uncovered some fossilized footprints at Dinosaur Valley State Park, most likely belonging to a theropod called Acrocanthosaurus. The prints had been covered by water and sediment for over 113 million years. This incredible video shows archaeologists opening an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus in front of a crowd of people. The coffin contained the body of an ancient priest and had been sealed for over 2,500 years by this point. More than 100 old books, manuscripts, and documents, some 1,200 years old, were recently discovered in the attic of a church in Romania. The trove hadn't been touched in hundreds of years and contains lost information about Transylvania and its history. In 1986, 3-year-old Oksana Malaya was left outside by her parents, so she walked to a nearby shed inhabited by wild dogs. When she was rescued 6 years later, she growled, walked on all fours, sniffed her food before eating it, and barked exactly like a dog. Today, she lives in a mental hospital and has the social capabilities of a 5-year-old. A Russian boy named Vanya Yudin was raised in a room surrounded by birds and cages because his mother thought that he was a pet. When he was rescued in 2008 at the age of 7, he could only communicate by chirping and flapping his arms. Jeannie Wiley was locked up in a room for 13 years by her father, who wanted to protect her from the outside world. He kept her tied up in a straitjacket and never spoke to her, only barking at her like a wild dog if she made any noise. When she was finally rescued, doctors said she had the cognitive abilities of a 1-year-old baby. Despite intensive efforts, Jeannie faced significant challenges in learning language and was eventually institutionalized for life. The creator of Rocket Raccoon is institutionalized due to brain damage from a hit and run in 1992. When Marvel made the Guardians of the Galaxy, they offered a compensation package that ensured care for the rest of his life. After he recovered from a series of severe health issues, Richard Pananyan's family sacrificed a lamb to God in hopes of keeping Richard healthy. But sadly, just 5 days later, Richard died in a bizarre car accident. He was ejected from his vehicle and landed on top of a highway street sign. Here's a mother and daughter from the Mong Bitu tribe in 1930. They believed that the elongation of the head would allow the brain to grow larger, thus increasing intelligence. In 2013, Erica Negrelli suffered a seizure while pregnant and died on the way to the hospital. Her daughter Elena was born healthy via an emergency C-section. But after the operation, Erica's heart miraculously started beating again. She was in a coma for 5 days before waking up and making a full recovery. In 2007, Joseph Swain from Delaware filed a lawsuit against his doctors after a horrific surgical mix-up. An apparently botched colostomy left him urinating out of his ass and pooping from his schlong. In 2021, an 82-year-old man from Austria had the wrong leg amputated during surgery. The patient was told he would still need his other leg amputated as well. In 2012, 88-year-old Ida Maciel died after nurses accidentally injected chicken soup into her veins instead of her feeding tube. In 2010, Nicolas Cage spent $61,000 on a pyramid-shaped grave for when he dies. The actor has chosen to remain silent about his reasoning for it, but many speculate it's a tribute to the National Treasure franchise. In Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery, there's a gravestone for a dog named Rex that died over 100 years ago. Instead of flowers, people bring sticks to his grave. Carved by himself in 1832, the headstone of John Reaney is an acrostic that reads, "Here lies John Reaney 46,000 different ways." This is the grave of H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist who designed the creatures for the movie Alien. Here's the gravestone of Elijah Bond, the man who invented the Ouija board. Father designed this headstone for his wheelchair-bound son, depicting him free of his earthly burdens. This is the incredible tombstone of Rudolf Nureyev, a Soviet man who's considered to be one of the greatest dancers of the 20th century. The grave was designed to look like a carpet, but it's made entirely of glass and bronze. In 2021, Tennessee man Tyson Gilbert cut off his own tallywhacker and threw it out the window as he was being chased by police. He allegedly claimed that voices on the radio told him that doing so would save the world. The animal that causes the most deaths in the US annually is deer. This is due to them blindly leaping into roadways, resulting in an estimated 200 deaths per year. The runner-up is bees, wasps, and hornets, with right around 60 deaths caused annually. Lolong was the Guinness Book of World Records holder for the largest saltwater crocodile in captivity. But the 20-foot-long, 2,400-pound beast died of fungal infection and stress 2 years after being captured. Tennessee man James Washington was always the prime suspect of a 1995 murder, but there was never sufficient evidence to charge him. That was until 2012 when he was having a heart attack and confessed to the murder because he thought he was on his deathbed. But he ended up surviving and was convicted based on this confession, which he later tried to take back. An ancient Egyptian stele from the sunken city of Heraklion was recovered from the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea earlier this year. Heraklion was once the largest port in Egypt over 2,000 years ago until it was destroyed by natural disasters over time. The incredibly preserved slab is made of granite and includes information about ancient taxes. This tiny species of mushroom that looks like it belongs on another planet was recently discovered in Taiwan. No one has tried consuming one yet, but the internet thinks it will allow you to see God. For decades, it was believed that the first humans arrived in North America around 13,000 years ago. But fossilized footprints recently found in New Mexico provide evidence that humans were actually here much earlier. Scientists found 60 footprints that are between 21,000 and 23,000 years old, indicating that humans occupied southern parts of the continent some 10,000 years earlier than archaeologists and historians previously thought. Last year, a perfectly intact 1,500-year-old arrow was discovered nestled between some rocks in Norway. The research team thinks it was encased in ice, then transported downslope as the ice melted. An amateur diver exploring shallow waters near Israel recently discovered this 900-year-old iron sword. Experts believe it belonged to a Crusader knight before he lost it overboard during a fierce battle in the 11th century. An incredible discovery was recently made during renovations at a church in Naples, Italy. Behind a 16th century painting called Life of San Severo, workers found a hidden painting depicting St. George slaying a dragon. The average silverback gorilla is 4 to 9 times stronger than the average human male. They can deadlift 1,800 pounds, and their grip can crush the skull of a crocodile. Luckily, gorillas in captivity and in the wild have been known to be very peaceful creatures that will only attack when provoked. But this doesn't mean there haven't been a few isolated cases of stupid people pushing their luck. In 2007, a woman frequently visited Germany's Rotterdam Zoo and spent a lot of time smiling at the male gorilla Bokito. Zoo employees warned her many times about making eye contact with him, since greater apes typically interpret eye contact as a display of aggression. But the woman claimed she and Bokito shared a special bond, so she ignored these warnings. Until one day, Bokito decided he had enough when some kids were throwing rocks at him, so he leaped over the water ditch that separated him from visitors. The woman narrowly survived the attack, spending months in the hospital and undergoing several reconstructive surgeries. A boy born with just 2% of his brain completely defied doctors' predictions after his brain grew to 80% of the average size. Doctors had told his parents to terminate the pregnancy not once, not twice, but 5 times. The chief baker on the Titanic, Charles Joe Finn, survived in icy waters for 2 hours before he was rescued. He claimed he didn't feel cold at all thanks to how hammered he was from all the whiskey he was drinking that night. In 1999, skydiver Joan Murray's parachute malfunctioned, causing her to fall 14,000 feet to the ground. But miraculously, Joan survived the fall only because she landed directly onto a mound of fire ants. Doctors believe that being stung over 200 times by the ants released a surge of adrenaline that kept her heart beating. In 1915, a distraught woman who was late to her sister's funeral demanded to see her one last time. So the coffin was raised out of the ground, and when it was opened, the dead woman sat up and smiled. She went on to live for another 47 years. Just last year, archaeologists in Lima, Peru came across a mummy that was bound in ropes in an underground tomb. It's estimated to be up to 1,200 years old, as rope binding was a traditional part of the local funeral process around that time. A linguistics study recently found that winter workers in Australia have started to develop an entirely new accent. This is a result of them being isolated and in regular contact with only each other for several months. In the early 1900s, British explorer Percy Fawcett theorized about an ancient lost city called Z that was somewhere in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. But he was never able to prove this myth since he vanished in 1925 during his third attempt to find the city. However, thanks to recent LiDAR technology, scientists have been able to digitally peel back part of the Amazon rainforest, revealing an extensive urban settlement that was heavily populated for many centuries. These areas are very difficult to excavate since they're very deep in the jungle, but scientists believe that within the next 10 to 20 years, our historical perception of the Amazon will completely change. These are the incriminating Google searches that Brian Walsh made before and after he murdered his wife Anna.
4:55 a.m. on January 1st, he searched how long before a body starts to smell. At 4:58 a.m., how to stop a body from decomposing. At 5:20 a.m., he searched how to embalm a body. At 5:47 a.m., 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. At 6:25 a.m. on the 1st, how long for someone to be missing to inherit. At 6:34 a.m. on the 1st, can you throw away body parts? At 9:29 a.m., what does formaldehyde do? At 9:34 a.m. on the 1st, how long does DNA last? At 9:59 a.m., can identification be made on partial remains? At 11:34 a.m., dismemberment and the best ways to dispose of a body. At 11:44, how to clean blood in a wooden floor. At 11:56 on the 1st, luminol to detect blood. At 1:08, what happens when you put body parts in ammonia? At 1:21 p.m., is it better to throw crime scene clothes away or wash them?